Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds, Edge to Edge Transformation. And speaking of transformation, everyone's life, in one way or the other, has been touched by these technological changes. And if not yet, we may feel it even more going forward. And one of the people I got to know in the process of talking about technology and how it affects careers was several years ago when I met online MeiMei Fox, and she was writing about careers and how people can work remotely for Forbes. MeiMei, tell us a little bit about your journey, both your personal journey and your journey with technology.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's really an honor. So I would like to say that Shankar calls me an early adopter. And this is definitely the case because I began my writing career 25 years ago, and I have always been remote for 25 years. And when I began back in the late 90s, I started as a ghostwriter. So I graduated from Stanford with a degree in psychology. I went to work for McKinsey and Company, which is a big management consulting firm. And I was there in the San Francisco office for 2 years. And while I had incredible colleagues and I learned a lot from my experience, I also knew it was not a fit for me. I felt really called to do purpose-driven work. I wanted my career to have purpose and meaning, and I didn't feel that I got that at a consulting company. So I left, and then I was kind of lost. I was only like 26 years old. I didn't know what to do next. And I had a friend who was a doctor who said, "Do you want to write a book with me about health and wellness?" And I said, "I'd love to." He knew that I was passionate about reading and writing. So I went to the bookstore. I bought a book called How to Write a Book Proposal. I read it. I wrote a book proposal. I emailed it to everyone I knew and said, "Does anyone know anyone in publishing?" And what do you know? A friend said, "Oh, one of my friends just started at Penguin Putnam." She was very junior, but she offered to look at your proposal. So I sent it to her. And about a week later, she wrote and said, "I never do this, but I'm buying your book." This was like, I had no idea how difficult the publishing world was when I started my journey, but it was a totally fortuitous event. They bought the book, and out of that, the senior editor on the project at Penguin Putnam, Amy Hertz, just took me under her wing and became my mentor and said, "You can do this for a living." And I said, "Do what for a living?" I didn't even know it was a career, Shankar. I mean, I had no idea. Like, ghostwriting is a whole career. Nobody who is a CEO, a celebrity, a famous athlete has written their own book. They all work with ghostwriters. And so whether that's advertised or not, just, they have somebody behind the scenes who's working with them. And so she hooked me up with a literary agent. She got me my first project beyond the book that she had published, which was called Sexual Fitness. And so she got me a project with Robert Thurman, who's a professor of Buddhism at Columbia University. And I worked on Infinite Life with him. And from there, it took off. So this is what's interesting now. I was probably about 3 or 4 years into that career when people started saying to me, "Oh, you should be in New York. You should move to New York." Everything in publishing back then was in New York. Now the world has changed a bit, but back then, everything was in New York. All the publishers, all the literary agents, and they're like, "You have to be in New York." And my response to that was, why? First of all, the authors I was working with are all over the world. I mean, I had authors in New York, but I had authors in San Francisco, LA. So that was one thing. And two, I said, especially when it comes to writing, the proof is in the pudding. All that matters is the words on the page, ultimately, in the end, is the words on the page. And there's no reason why I can't go back and forth with someone via email to get the right words on the page. And if we need to talk, we talk. And in those days, it was pick up the phone and call. It was a phone call. But you can have a phone call and I can take notes on the phone call, and then I can revise the draft and send a new draft, and then you can look at it and then send it back to me. So I didn't move to New York, and I was happy in San Francisco. I had a life there. And lo and behold, 25 years later, I'm still doing that. I have since moved to LA. I have moved to Hawaii, moved to Paris for 2 years with my family, took my kids and we all went to Paris for 2 years, came back to Hawaii during the pandemic, and also I spent an entire year traveling the world in 2004. I lived in Costa Rica for 6 months at one point. So I've had tremendous flexibility and liberty in terms of where I am geographically. And it has never come up again since the late 90s that you should be in New York.
MeiMei, you said you went around the world, and were you working at the time as well?
I was. Yeah, absolutely. My way of traveling around the world is to do like a month in one place and then a month or two in the next. So it's not like being on the road constantly. So that's my feelings, like when you go and you spend some time in that you can really get settled. You're like in a, rented apartment, or you're doing a home exchange or something like that. And you can settle in, you have a kitchen, you have a workspace. And yeah, I was working the whole time. I was working on a couple books at that time.
The way things are happening with the advent of generative AI, there are so many platforms out there, including ChatGPT and Google Bard, that could completely change the way books are written. Do you foresee major changes coming up to the art of writing, including ghostwriting?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think it is a monumental shift that is happening right now. I don't think, honestly, that any of us has any idea of what is truly ahead. But I will say already, I've seen a couple things. One is even the free tools on ChatGPT, Google Bard are excellent editors. And when I talk about editing, I'm talking about like line editing. So not editing for content, not editing the way that I do when I'm a freelance editor. I partner with an author. If they already have a manuscript written, they may hire me still as an editor to take a look at the manuscript, reorganize certain parts of it, identify places where I think it's not working as well, where maybe we need another story, a different example. And that is freelance editing. So that's very hands-on. I'm very in there, involved in every word on the page and conceptually. But there's a level of editing beyond that that usually is done. If you work with a traditional publishing house, it's done in-house by the traditional publisher. If you self-publish, most people hire someone to do that, typically in the past. But now line editing, which is the kind of crossing the T, dotting the I's, apostrophes, making sure that a sentence isn't confusing and it's phrasing, that can all be done by generative AI in a heartbeat. And it does a really good job with that. So that is already happening. I already see the role for line editors virtually gone from the world that we live in. But there's more, because even though I don't think you can yet have generative AI write a book for you, or even really write a magazine article for you that's good, that's quality, what it can do, I'm already using it for, which is like structuring things. You can tell it to give you an outline for a book that you want to write. Say, hey, I want to write a business book about, that's for CEOs, managing diversity and inclusion. Boom, it'll come up with a table of contents for you in about 35 seconds, which is mind-boggling, and it's pretty good too. Again, it's good. Like, this is the really shocking thing to me. I don't know if you've had this experience, but when I started using it last October, I was like, this is really good. I don't know. I guess I expected it to sound more like a computer, right? But it doesn't. It's really good.
I use it every day.
Right. The other thing is, and I do use it this way for my Forbes articles now. So I write for Forbes on the side, really, as a way to promote my own brand, get my voice out there, have a platform that reaches a larger audience. I don't really get paid very much, but so I want to do it fast, right? It's all about efficiency for me. And so what I've started doing is I will use ChatGPT, for example, to just say, I'm writing an article about plastic pollution in the ocean, for example, right? And I'm going to be talking to this person who's the CEO of a company called Ocean Bottle that takes reclaimed plastic from the ocean and turns it into water bottles. But I need like an opening paragraph about what's going on with plastic pollution in the ocean right now. I'll ask ChatGPT. It'll generate an opening paragraph for me. Again, okay, I do not copy and paste. I'm really clear on this. I don't. But it is an excellent start. It really will give me like a great sounding board. I use that. I copy and paste it in. I make some edits. My experience has been, it's not necessarily good at the hyperlinks to the data. So that is where I really see it as falling short. I think it will advance quickly. In the next year, it's probably going to be a different story altogether, and then we can talk again. But right now, I ask it to give me hyperlinks for the sources to back up the claims that it's making, and it's not very good. So that the data might be out of date. It might be for not a really reputable source. Like I really only want to quote really reputable sources when I'm writing for Forbes. So I want like, you know, the FDA of America, like the Food and Drug Administration, or I want like the World Bank says this is, you know, the percentage of poverty right now. I want like really credible sources, and that it's not as good at. So I find I have to supplement. I have to go to Google, do a search, find the credible sources and plug in those hyperlinks. It's not going to necessarily deliver that to me on ChatGPT, but it will deliver a really great opening paragraph or two that I can just edit and tweak a bit. And that's going to save me probably 10, 15 minutes, which is a lot for where I'm at right now. So I've already seen all of that.
In your case, clearly you're using the technology and doing many more things. But what about a lot of writers who are just doing line editing? What will happen to the jobs? What will happen to their careers?
Oh, I think that AI is going to eliminate millions of jobs. Millions. It is. There's no question. And I think that in the creative fields, it feels very treacherous right now. I mean, if you see the SAG-AFTRA strike in the US right now, you know that the Hollywood is on strike, the actors are on strike, the writers are on strike. Why? Part of it, not all of it, part of it is around deals around streaming services and stuff, but part of it is around AI. Because, you know, one of the things that the movie companies are saying is like, especially for extras or background figures, if we've used your image once, we can use it in perpetuity. Like, we don't need extras anymore, right? Or even for writing, if you already have the characters developed, if you give it some plot points, can it create a decent script? Line editing, I told you, line editing's done already. I don't know, like, who's going to pay somebody to line edit anymore when you don't need to. So I think it's going to eliminate millions and millions of creative jobs. My husband has just completed a historical fiction novel called Conquest, and we are selling it to publishers right now, okay? And so he's an incredibly gifted writer. He's also a really talented filmmaker. He graduated from USC Film School and directing. He went on generative AI in January and said, I wonder what happens if I plug in some character descriptions in here. Can I create some cool images? Oh my gosh. Shankar, again, it was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, it wasn't one step, okay? It wasn't. It would take him a day to complete an image, but I'm talking a day versus like a month. Seriously, that's the difference. So he had to learn how to do the prompts correctly. Then he would take some prompts, he'd put them in for the background, like he wanted tall ships in the background, because this takes place in the 17th century and the discovery of the New World and stuff. And then he's like, okay, I need some Maroons, who are these escaped, formerly enslaved people living up in the mountains of Jamaica. So he described like what and then he put that on the foreground. So he had to do that. And, he had to, translate that into After Effects. But in the end, I mean, one day to create this phenomenal image that looks like it was made by an absolutely top-notch artist. And he is, like I said, he is a visual artist, but not this kind of artist, right? And he could create it in one day. I mean, it was mind-boggling. So what did he end up doing? He's like, I'm going to make a trailer for the book to help sell it. So he put together like 10 of these images he created, plugged it in to like a QuickTime video, added some music that the AI helped him pick, and boom, now we have this like beautiful 1-minute video to help sell the book. I mean, that's something that would have required probably, let's say, $50,000 investment in the past,
Yes, yes.
and he did it for free.
For my company, Blue Horizons, you see that picture in the background? That is actually an artistic rendition of Point Lobos, which is right in front of our home. And I said, okay, we have Point Lobos, the photographs. Why don't we ask Dali to create an image? And it did it. And it gave not one, but four pictures in like 2 minutes. Some of it is gifts, right? I mean, these are amazing things. We are almost having superpowers. So, what are the gifts of AI that you see coming into your personal life or professional life? You're a parent, you have two twins. Uh, in what ways do you anticipate this kind of technology, not just in writing or painting, but in every walk of life? In what ways will it transform your life? Do you have any idea, or has it already done some of this transformation?
I mean, for us, there's no doubt it already has. I think in terms of creativity, honestly, it is my hope for the world that it doesn't just destroy all of humanity, but that we are forced to elevate to the next level, right? I mean, I just think that if you can have AI kind of doing the line editing or generating images based on your suggestions, then you have to just keep coming up with new ideas and new worlds and new concepts as a creative. So that part of our work is as important as ever. But the nitty gritty other tasks, which is going to be millions of jobs, unfortunately, are eliminated. So it's a very mixed bag as far as I'm concerned. And I see that for my children as well. I think it'll be a mixed bag for them too. I think that it'll be amazing. I think we can't even predict how they will be learning 10 years from now. I mean, I don't know about you, but when you're a parent, back in my day, all anybody talked about was the college fund. But now I'm looking at people and going like, college fund, that's 10 years away. I don't know if there's going to be college as we know, maybe for a subsection of the population, but I don't think it's going to be like the path for everyone the way that it was for so many generations. I don't. I think that's already changing too. And I see potential for tremendous breakthrough in things like medical research, cancer treatments, climate change, how to solve some like really massive global problems. And I also see the dark side of creating massive global problems, because I think we've already seen that with the internet. I mean, I was living in San Francisco in the 90s. I was there. I was at the epicenter when the internet took off. And we all thought it was going to save the world, because now, you can't have oppressive regimes anymore. Everybody has a voice. It's going to be freedom and equality for all. And like, look where it's taken us. It's taken us in the opposite direction of dictatorships and, misinformation. So I think that, as with everything in life, I mean, like you've done Vipassana retreats, so have I. There's light and darkness in everything. See
In
both.
fact, there was a real need for me right after the whole boom in technology, running a startup using AI for reducing the toxicity of medicines. I realized I was so swamped with the information overload that I needed to take a break, and I literally ended up just like you'd end up in a hospital into 10 days of silence with Vipassana. At some point, you did that too, as you just alluded to it. How did it change your life? And do you feel we'll need to do that when we have so much information being thrown at us? The human mind can't even absorb it, right? What was
No.
your motivation? Why did you take these kinds of breaks?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad you asked that. I think it's going to become more important than ever as we move forward to take the breaks. More important than ever to take the breaks from technology, to be silent, to be in nature, to be away from stimulation. And also, I feel passionately that we're going to be looking more and more to get embodied, because part of being online all the time is we're like so disconnected from our bodies. We forget we have them, like, has that ever happened to you where you're like hours go by and you're like, I haven't eaten, or like, I haven't gone to the bathroom. I've been sitting here, just like you get so disembodied. So I feel like there's going to be a calling to get embodied through yoga, through meditation, through massage, through being in nature, being disconnected. My initial Vipassana retreat was completely driven by my first breakdown in my life, which was when I was in my early 30s. I got divorced, which I never thought I would be divorced. And it really brought up a lot of self-loathing for me. Like, I'm a failure, I'm a bad person. And then at the same time, there was a crisis in my family of origin, and my mom and dad split. And it was just I felt like the whole house had burned down. And I was kind of left standing there in the ashes. And I thought, well, this is the moment. You either get to just sink into a state of despair, or you rebuild. And the beauty of the house burning down is that you rebuild whatever you want. You get to start over. And so for me, I made a conscious effort to make spirituality part of my rebuilding. And I went to the Vipassana retreat to listen to the voices in my head and disconnect a little bit from, the inner critic, and feel this profound connection with nature, with all of humanity, with a higher consciousness. It changed. Like, I tell people, it rewired my brain. I mean, I really feel that experience permanently rewired my brain. And so I'm so deeply, deeply grateful to it. It was transformative for me.
And
so,
that's how I got connected with you. I didn't know you
yeah.
until I read your article on Vipassana and how it changed your life. And I hope someday you write a memoir about it, because I can't wait to hear your full story
Oh,
someday
you're
soon.
so kind to say that. Yeah, I've got that in the works. I've written a rough draft and I'm rewriting it now. Generative AI is going to help me.
I'm writing a memoir about my travel. Remember, you interviewed me on Forbes
Yes.
in 2016. And then we went around to India and a few other nations. And I worked in rural communities. And I have tremendous resistance to writing. I'd taken notes everywhere, taken pictures. And guess what? It's been generative AI to the rescue. So I'm putting together a storybook, wandering around in Wonderland, going through India and Mexico, and just being from the ghettos to the palaces. And it's an interesting thing. It's very personal. At the same time, to to remove the barriers to writing, which is the writer's block. That's when I use these tools. It is still very much my writing, but the writer's block is where it helps me to continue writing. So it's been an experience.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful to help overcoming writer's block or generate prompts. That's another great way to use generative AI in writing. Yeah.
And you brought up quite a few things about the challenges and the fact that hopefully a lot of the mundane stuff and maybe some of the creative stuff will be done by machines. And that will leave us a lot more free time. But in the history of technology, if you've seen from the first industrial revolution, when people thought, oh, we're going to get a lot of free time, that never happened. We learned to fill up our time with all kinds of activities. Where do you see this revolution taking us? Do you have a crystal ball, at least a projection of what can happen? In the
I don't
technology space, there will be no time. We'll be busy like hell. There's so much more to invent and discover. What about in the artistic space? What about in writing? What about in making movies? Do you think there'll be a little more time?
No, I think you're absolutely right. There's never more time. We always find a way to fill it up. It's like, as I said, if you take away the line editing, well, then you can just produce more, right? Or, if you take away some of the actual painting of the painting that's behind you, then you can just produce more. So obviously you're not going to just keep producing. So that's where I really feel like we have to elevate, we're going to have to push ourselves to the next level. I don't have a crystal ball to see what that is, but I feel that is where we have to go. I feel like it's either we elevate to the next level, or we're going to like self-destruct.
If everybody potentially can be a producer, many more people are now writing on places like LinkedIn and Facebook, and even articles, because it's much easier to write, even for introverts who've never been expressive. It gives them the potential for expressing. But then who's there to read? Who's there to consume what is written?
That's
So do you,
exactly it. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's not infinite. It's not, and our attention spans are already so limited. That's why I say millions of people are going to get laid off. But, hopefully we can figure out how to kind of elevate what we're producing.
What about the role of magazines? It's already changed tremendously from the days when you got into writing, where there were more books and newspapers. It's already gone, a lot of it has gone online. But now with the ability to create and summarize much more easily, and also create and hallucinate and create fake things, where do you think this whole industry of publishing, what do you see happening?
I mean, it's interesting because you did mention the misinformation, which is, already proven a huge influence in our society. And that is only going to increase. So what happens when you not only don't know what writing you can trust, but you can't even trust a video that you see, because anybody can make a video of anything and put it up and say that this is real. And as you said, we've moved away from magazines in the sense of, when I was younger and first started, it was print magazines, and there were barely, online magazines were just barely starting. They were considered like third tier. Now it's like people have asked me for Forbes before. Oh, is this for the print magazine or for online? I'm like, well, they are still keeping a print magazine going, but the online gets like 100 times the views, right? So that has changed. People are consuming stuff online. What can you trust? What can you not trust? I actually anticipate that there might be a bit of a movement back towards local. Like everything has been so global, right? It's like, you had your local news station, right? They used to watch when we were kids. And then you moved to the national news. And then you went online and you started consuming your media online, and you could watch YouTube videos from Al Jazeera of what's happening like in the Middle East that you never used to would have had access to. You could only access what was being produced in America, which was all coming through an American lens. But now you can see, well, how are other countries in the world presenting the same information? That to me was really fascinating. I was like, oh, wow, this is tremendous to get a global viewpoint, or watch the BBC's version of events, whatever it is. But now it's like, if you can't trust what's coming out, then I think we're going to rely more and more on like really, the voices that we feel we can trust. The branding, I think, is going to be like super important. And then also local. I see like a shift actually back to local, where I'm going to trust something that somebody who lives down the street puts up, because, there's the video of what happened there, is almost more trustworthy than something being posted, by some major media outlet. So I'm curious to see what happens with that.
Even our work is likely to change. It is already. In your case, you started 25 years earlier working remotely. I started working remotely in 2016 on a regular basis. But and do you think that's going to give more flexibility? I mean, you seem to be much happier working from wherever you want in the world. And so do I. We live in our vacation home now, not in Silicon Valley. We only go to Silicon Valley for meetings, and because we get bored of vacationing, if you will. Do you see people changing the way they live their lives, their work style, and all that because of the ubiquity of, connectivity and things like that?
Definitely. I think we've seen that, right? But what's interesting to me is, you and I were early adopters on that, maybe ahead of the curve. Then the pandemic happened, right? Then when COVID happened, everything shut down. And all these people who had been working in offices went to working remotely. And then we saw this massive migration also out of big cities, like you did, people moving. And also, I live in Hawaii, people moving from San Francisco to Hawaii, people moving out of New York and San Francisco and Seattle and other urban areas to the countryside, and then realizing like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. There's actually so much to be said for living somewhere that's a little quieter and more peaceful and closer to nature. And I can be online anytime, and I can do 99% of and when I do need to be there, I can travel. Like, you can drive into Silicon Valley, and even in Hawaii, it's a 5-hour flight. It is not that big a deal. We hop on a plane for 5 hours. We're in San Francisco or LA meeting face to face. But I'd rather live here in the environment that is more peaceful and calm and connected to my family and connected to nature. But what's fascinating to me, Shankar, is that I've also seen a rebound against that, right? Of companies saying, no, you can't be remote and you have to be in the office. And I'm curious to see what happens with that. I think that they're fighting a losing battle. What do you think? I don't think they're going to win that in the long term.
I think as long as there's fear in people's minds, they will not fight it too much. But like what has happened with other shifts in technology in the past, the more people find new things to do, new ways of doing things, I think the hold of the oligarchs will actually reduce,
Yeah,
whether they like it or not. I see a big democratization happening, but it is early to say. I
yeah,
think many more people will be enabled in ways we cannot even imagine. Imagine, I mean, you and I are sitting on a Zoom call,
yeah.
but I could be on a Zoom call with any country in the world today, practically, and on
Absolutely.
multiple languages, because now the translators are also helping. And I could be watching on TikTok videos from around the world and so on. So, yes, for a while there will be the hold, but I think it is a losing battle. When you started your career, Meme, you started in psychology, went to McKinsey in management consulting, decided that wasn't for you, and now you're doing something that you really love. How do you think students today or in future, or people in mid-career who realize this isn't what they want to do, how should they approach their careers? How did you approach your career, and how should others approach their careers?
No, it's a great question. So I'm a huge believer in purpose-driven work. As I said at the beginning of this call, I just think we spend most of our lives, our waking lives, are at work, and we have some time in the evenings and weekends. But even that, we're in this modern era, spending a lot of time working. And so I think it's so important that your work be something that you feel passionate about and that feels like it has purpose and meaning. I mean, it just changes everything. It goes, everyone I interview, I've interviewed almost 500 CEOs, entrepreneurs, change makers, nonprofit founders for my work with Forbes. And they all talk about this. It's like, when your work has meaning and purpose, it doesn't feel like work. And there becomes less of a separation between work, life. And I think that's how it should be. Your work you should be integrated, and your work is part of your life. You be passionate and on purpose, then you're motivated and driven to do that. So I really encourage people to seek purpose in their careers. And I have an archive of almost 500 articles of people talking about that. If anybody wants to go check it out, go read. They're in every possible career you could imagine. But a lot of them, I end with asking them what their advice is for young people. So a lot of them have advice at the end, but they talk about, like, there are people who know their purpose right out the bat. They're like practically born that way, right? Like you knew people like this. There are people in high school who knew they wanted to be doctors, right? And they did it. They went and they became doctors and they work as doctors. But a lot of us don't have that kind of clarity right from the get-go of what our purpose is. And so I think in that case, it's important to just experiment and try different things and volunteer and, pursue hobbies, and don't feel afraid of changing direction. I mean, I coach many people who have shifted direction in mid-career and midlife at age 50. And said, oh my gosh, I'm really burned out on what I'm doing and I want to make a change. You can always change. And so with young people, like people who are graduating college, I think sometimes they can become a little too obsessed with what am I majoring in and what's my job going to be. And they think like that's the whole rest of my life, but it's not, especially in this world we live in, it's not. So just choose the next best thing. Choose the thing that's going to excite you for now, or that you're going to learn from for now. And then you can change and shift again later. You're not setting yourself on a path forever. And that's
And
a beautiful thing about the world we live in.
you have made a shift in your career. I've been watching your new venture. Tell us a little bit about it.
That's so kind of you to ask. So I've been ghostwriting and freelance editing for 25 years and writing for Forbes and Huffington Post. I've also been life coaching for 15 years. So I did a therapy degree in my mid 30s and decided that I was going to be a life coach. So I've been doing that for 15 years too. So I thought, I need to combine these two things together. So I've launched a new business as a book coach. And what I do is I have an online course. It's starting in September, and it's going to take people through in 6 weeks from conception to completion of a nonfiction book. What are all the steps you need from structuring your book, choosing the most engaging stories and anecdotes, to marketing, choosing a publishing model, publishing, promoting, all the way through. So that is my 6-week course starting in September. And I also work one-on-one with clients on coaching them on how to write their own books. But this is not that different from what I've been doing. It's just that in the past, I would do all of the ghostwriting or editing myself. But now with generative AI, as we've discussed, people can, with a little guidance, shape and write much more of their book on their own, but they still need help in terms of like, oh, I'm not sure exactly what it should be about, or I'm not sure exactly how to structure it. And I certainly don't know how to publish it, because you could self-publish, hybrid publish, traditional publish, audiobook publish. I mean, there's so many options. And then, understanding the kind of building your book tribe, promotion side of things. So I'm really excited about that.
I'm excited too. Maybe I'm going to sign up for your first course because it is very interesting. And I've been writing a few things, mostly on technology in the past, but the personal writing has just started. So yes, I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, MeiMei, it is always exciting to talk to you and never enough time. But maybe a few years from now, we're going to talk again about how lives have shifted. Being on the cutting edge of technology, you get a early window into what's happening, and especially those 500 CEOs that you have talked to. Is there anything that stands out? You heard the story of 500 plus people. Is there
Yeah.
anything that stands out in your mind about the shifts people have gone through, the challenges they've faced, and how we can lead a purpose-driven career, purpose-driven life?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, one is I already spoke of, which is you don't necessarily know your purpose from the outset, and that's okay. So just be open-minded and curious to see what excites me. What do I feel like excited to get out of bed in the morning and do? Is just pay attention to that. And there are many points of entry into that, right? I mean, you don't necessarily, even if you love medicine, you don't necessarily have to be a doctor. You could study public health. You could, become a technology innovator in medical fields. You could do scientific research. There's many points of entry. So don't limit yourself with, oh, it has to be this one career. And then another thing I've heard so many people say is just, it's not failure. If you fail, you're going to fail, right? Like you're going to try things and they're not going to work out. And I've heard this from so many entrepreneurs, right? Where it's like, oh, this first iteration. So always in the tech world, this, you live in Silicon Valley. What is the buzzword there? Iterate, right? Iterate is like everybody talks about pivot, iterate. But I feel like outside of Silicon Valley, people don't use those words as not enough. It's like
Yeah.
you don't be afraid to pivot or iterate. Like I even did this myself. So last spring I started with like, I'm going to do this course in person and it's going to cost this amount. And then I spoke with different people. I got feedback. I got input from friends who are influencers, who are experts. And I pivoted a little bit. And I was like, okay, now I landed on the right format, but don't be afraid to pivot and iterate. It's part of life. And they consistently say the only failure is quitting. If you quit, that is failure. But as long as you keep going and you iterate and you pivot and you take feedback and you respond to what the market is asking for, then, eventually you're going to hit on something that works.
It's true. It's true. The Silicon Valley mantra of pivot, hack, try it out, fast failure, fail fast, fail often, so that it can go in a meaningful way. Other way is also happening in medicine. They try out different medicines, different drugs, different therapies, and to find the right drug. Let's say, for example, mRNA for COVID. They had to experiment with all kinds of medicines in a hurry because tens of thousands of people were dying, right? And by pivoting, they were able to find a class of drugs, mRNA, and a few others that seemed to work. And then they had to test it. And lo and behold, most people were saved. So,
Yeah,
yes,
wasn't that amazing? Talk
it
about a
is.
miracle story of the modern era. I mean, truly.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the speed with which a very effective vaccine was developed and distributed to the world is unreal.
And they also had to fight the, the false propaganda around it, whether the Bill Gates propaganda or it is the Obama propaganda, or even worse, don't take these vaccines. It's a grand scheme against humanity or against making quick money and things like that. I don't think anybody had such sinister goals, especially not the very rich people. What would they do with that extra money? But again, false propaganda is a way of life. It has always been, but it's now huge microphones and megaphones that are making louder. So we survived through the pandemic, and I think we will survive through many more such calamities, including fake news wars and all kinds of fake propaganda. Yes, we'll have to get you back. And to people who are listening, it's always exciting to get different views. So far, I have talked to many technologists, but I'm actually very curious to see how so-called non-technologists like MeiMei, who are early adopters, are already finding the changes. And what are your fears? What are your aspirations? Where do you see technology going? Because only then we'll get a realistic assessment of where technology is shifting. I talked to one of the leading people at Siemens on how technology is shifting and the invention of autonomous vehicles. And he said the big problem is not technology, it's regulation, it's people, and how our minds work around technology, the fears we have, and all those things.
Oh,
So yes, there will be many roadblocks, there will be many risks, there will be many dangers, but we are in it together. So please come forward, speak out, and maybe we'll have to talk to you again. May you continue creating new things, and may you find out what you want to be when you grow up someday.